Blood in his garage linked to Celeste. Packages delivered to his house, including a chainsaw and an Uber ride that took her straight to him, the last night she was known to be alive. And that's just a fraction of what's now coming out in this case. Because when you actually go through the details, this isn't just an update anymore. It's a full story being pieced together. A lot of this new info that's now come out is absolutely disturbing. And in this video, I want to go over exactly what's going on here. If you thought the story was bad, just wait till you hear this. Now on April 29, 2026, literally just yesterday at the time we were recording this, there was a major court hearing in the David case. And during it, prosecutors basically laid out everything they have on David, all the evidence, and the story they believe happened. Now let's go back to September 2025 and just lay some of the groundwork. When human remains were discovered inside the front trunk of a Tesla at an impound lot in Los Angeles. At the time, they didn't know who the remains belonged to, but what they found out was that the car was registered to a popular singer, David. And 8 days later, the remains were identified as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And as far as how she was identified, this is actually something that was unknown up until now. According to court documents, it was through dental records. That's how they confirmed it was her. That was not a piece of information that was out there until now. And the way the remains were even found in the first place is something that needs to be talked about. And look, this part is pretty uncomfortable to go through, but it's important because these are details that deserve to be known. Now, when the story initially broke, we were told that someone at the tow yard noticed a strong smell coming from the vehicle, and that's what led to the discovery. But according to court documents, it was specifically the manager of the tow yard, not just any worker. And it wasn't just a smell. They also noticed flies coming from the vehicle. That detail was never reported. When LAPD detectives opened the trunk, the cadaver bag was covered in insects. And of course, inside was a severely decomposed head and torso, and underneath it, a separate bag which contained the dismembered arms and legs. This is how Celeste was unfortunately found. And these new court documents are simply filling in the gap that we didn't even know existed. And that right there is where this entire case begins. And those are of course the basics of how this whole thing was first discovered. Because once you understand that, everything that comes next starts to make a lot more sense. Now after the car is discovered, it's eventually traced back to where it was last parked before all this. And this is where it gets interesting, because that Tesla had been sitting on Bluebird Avenue in Los Angeles, just a few hundred feet away from David's home in the Hollywood Hills. And based on surveillance footage that the investigators recovered, David is actually the last person seen driving the Tesla on July 29, 2025 before leaving Los Angeles for his tour. Now keep in mind, David's Wither tour kicked off on August 5th, 2025, which is just days after he's reportedly seen driving that Tesla. And then about a month later, that same car ends up at an impound lot in Los Angeles. And this is the point in the story where the focus really starts to shift. Because at this point, investigators already have someone on their radar. And it's David, because the car is registered to David, and according to prosecutors, he's the last person seen driving it. And once they start digging deeper, this is when they begin uncovering the connection between David and Celeste. And this is where the case takes a much more serious turn. Because as they keep digging into this, they uncover something else. According to court documents, David and Celeste first met back in January 2022, when she was just 11 years old and he was 16, about to turn 17. But it doesn't stop there, because prosecutors allege that by November 2023, that relationship had become sexual when she was just 13 and he was 18. I'm not going to water that down. I'm just going to tell it like it is, how it's being laid out, because those parts usually get left out, but they matter. And this is also when they start learning more about Celeste, because as they dig into her situation, they find out that Celeste had actually run away from home in the past multiple times and had been reported missing by her family on more than one occasion. Now the details of who she was actually reported missing to, we didn't know until now. According to these new court documents, it was specifically the Riverside County Sheriff's Department that her family reported her missing to. And that detail matters because you'll hear very shortly, it's actually the same department that got David on the phone back in 2024. He spoke to them directly on the phone. We'll get there in a second, but just keep that in mind. So 2 separate reports from her own family that we know of. First in February 2024, and then again in April 2024. And that right there tells you a lot about what was going on in Celeste's life during that time. And this is where we kind of need to go back a little bit, because a lot of this had already happened months before. And this is what investigators would later piece together. On February 17, 2024, law enforcement actually reached out to David by phone. Now keep in mind, at this point, Celeste is still alive, but she had been reported missing around that same time by her family. So investigators go through her phone records, and that's when they come across a number that's connected directly to David. And that's what leads to this phone call. And during that conversation, David tells them that the last time he had contact with Celeste was just a few days earlier, around February 13 or February 14. And he also claims that he was unaware she was a minor or that she had been reported missing. So at that point, they decide they're gonna see him in person. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, she was a runaway teenager, and then here's this mysterious number of this person who she apparently had contact with, which is David. And then law enforcement is like, you know what, let's pay this person a visit. And so later that same evening on February 17, 2024, officers show up to where David was staying in West Hollywood to conduct what's called a welfare check. Basically, law enforcement checking on someone's safety. And when they get there, they inform David directly that Celeste is a 13-year-old runaway who had been reported missing. And during that interaction with the officers, David once again tells officers that he was unaware she was a minor and that he had only met Celeste once in person around November 2023. So at this point, he's keeping his distance, basically saying, I don't really know what's going on here. But this is also where things start to get interesting, because despite those claims, according to prosecutors, David showed deputies a yearbook photo of Celeste that he had saved on his phone. And even with that, he still claims he doesn't know where she is at the time. Now, Celeste would eventually return home shortly after that. But according to investigators, this is where things start to escalate, because even after law enforcement told him directly that she was 13 years old, prosecutors allege that David continued to pursue her. And this is when her family steps in, because after she returns home, her parents take her phone away. But it doesn't stop there, because according to prosecutors, things go even further. They claim that David actually drove to Lake Elsinore, where Celeste was from, and paid a student at her school around $1,000 to give her a phone so they could stay in contact. And from there, investigators say things only got deeper, because throughout the year 2024, they allege that David and Celeste spent a significant amount of time together, including things like summer weekends at his Hollywood Hills home, and even traveling together to places like Las Vegas, overseas to London, and even Texas to meet his family. Now at this point, based on what investigators say they've uncovered, we already have a pretty clear picture here of what they're alleging. But it goes even further, because investigators say they recovered text messages between Celeste and David, and according to them, those messages included references to sex, pregnancy, abortion, and the use of Plan B. They also claim that they found explicit photographs, which they say confirm that the relationship was sexual, and some other text messages that were recovered that I think are worth mentioning. According to these court documents, there was one message in particular that was sent by Celeste to David, and this message was sent on March 2025, and it gives you a real sense of what she was going through. In her own words, she expressed wanting more than what the situation had become, and according to investigators, those messages were recovered from David's iCloud account data. But it doesn't stop there, because according to investigators, by November 2024, David and Celeste had broken up. But even after that, they remained in constant communication, and based on the messages recovered, investigators alleged that the relationship continued. Heavy quotation mark on the relationship. This is just what the prosecution is saying, so I'm just reading what they are saying in these documents. Just keep that in mind. Now, up until this point, this is what we knew, right? The prosecution claimed that on April 23rd, 2025, Celeste arrived at the Hollywood Hills home where David was staying, and that is the last time she's ever seen alive. We also knew that leading up to this, she had allegedly threatened to expose the quote-unquote, right, relationship between them. And quote-unquote because you can't really have a relationship with a child, right? And that, according to investigators, is what they believe led to her murder. But now we're starting to get a much clearer picture of what they say actually happened inside the house, according to them. Now, according to investigators, on April 23rd, 2025, that's when Celeste's phone activity suddenly stops. And this is what they say happened the night before. On April 22nd, 2025, David and Celeste got into a lengthy argument over text. And according to prosecutors, the source of that argument was Celeste becoming upset over David's relationship with other women. They also claimed that David had led her to believe that they had a future together. And as that argument escalated, investigators say Celeste becomes extremely upset and threatens to expose the relationship in a way that could damage his career and destroy his life. And when you look at the timing, it becomes even more serious, because just 2 days later, David was set to release his debut studio album. and prosecutors say he had a very fast-growing career with major opportunities on the line, which is something they point to when talking about what was at stake here. And this is when we get to the moment when Celeste actually arrives to the home. Because according to prosecutors, at around 8:40 p.m. on April 23, 2025, David sends an Uber to pick Celeste up from Lake Elsinore, where her family home was located. And during our ride, investigators say David is in communication with her before and throughout the trip. And then at approximately 10 past 10 p.m., Celeste is finally dropped off at the Hollywood Hills home where David was staying. And this is where the timeline, according to investigators, starts to raise questions. Because the Uber ride is completed at around 10 past 10 p.m. That's when Celeste is dropped off at the house. But then, about 20 minutes later, at around 10:30 p.m., investigators say David sends text messages asking, where is she? Like, where you at? You were supposed to come. And this raises a major question. Because according to prosecutors, those messages were not genuine. They claim that this was part of a premeditated effort to create the appearance that she had never arrived. Because according to their timeline, they allege that by this point, Celeste was already dead. Prosecutors go on to claim that shortly after she arrived, that's when David stabbed her multiple times. The medical examiner later ruled her death as a homicide, caused by penetrating injuries to the torso. And according to the prosecutors, this is what they say happened immediately after. They allege that shortly after Celeste's death, David drove towards Santa Barbara County, attempting to dispose of her belongings and destroy evidence. And then at around 11:30 p.m., investigators say he leaves the house while continuing to text and call her phone, asking where she was. And according to prosecutors, those actions were calculated to create an alibi. They also allege that he then drove his Tesla north along the 101 freeway towards Santa Barbara County, near the Lake Cachuma area. And then early the next morning, April 24, 2025, investigators say he returns home before going to a radio interview for the release of his album that same week. And then that same evening of April 24th, 2025, according to court documents, David had an album release party, and he went to it. So within 24 hours, radio interview, album release party, and according to prosecutors, Celeste at this point was already dead. And there is one more detail from those Santa Barbara County trips worth mentioning. According to these new court documents, Celeste's U.S. passport card was actually found by Caltrans worker. Caltrans is basically the department that maintains California's roads and highways, and they found her passport off SR 154, also known as San Marcos Pass Road, near Lake Cachuma. And the passport card was found there in January 2026, so just a few months ago. And keep in mind, this is the same general area that prosecutors say David was traveling to multiple times. And investigators also say that after all this, David sent additional messages to her phone, which went unanswered. And according to prosecutors, after April 26, 2025, he never attempted to contact her again. And at that point, the question becomes, what do investigators say happened next? How do they claim all of this was covered up? Well, according to court documents, this is what they say his actions were in the days that followed. On April 24, 2025, investigators allege that David ordered a shovel from Home Depot, a major home improvement retailer, and that shovel was delivered to his house through Postmates, a delivery service. And then just days later, on May 1st, 2025, they claim that David ordered 2 chainsaws through Amazon, which were delivered that same day. And then about 4 days after that, on May 5th, 2025, investigators say he ordered additional items, including a body bag, heavy-duty laundry bags, and a blue inflatable pool, all delivered to his home. Investigators also claim that David made these purchases under a fake name. The name was Victoria Mendez. And just 3 days later, on May 8, 2025, investigators say he returns to that same area in Santa Barbara County, where they allege he had previously attempted to dispose of Celeste's belongings and destroy evidence. They say he leaves his home at around 11:30 p.m. that night, and it doesn't stop there, because according to investigators, he returns to that same area again on May 31st, 2025. And investigators also claim that on July 7, 2025, David allegedly ordered what they described as a burn cage under that same fake name, which they say was intended to destroy evidence. And at this point, this is where the details start to get significantly more serious, because according to prosecutors, they now begin to outline what they claim happened next. And I'm not going to get into anything unnecessary, but I'm going to walk you through the details as they are presented here, right? Now remember the blue inflatable pool, the one investigators say was ordered from Amazon? Well, according to prosecutors, they allege that it was used inside the garage to prevent any blood from spreading onto the floor. And those chainsaws that were also ordered, investigators claim were used in the dismemberment. And this is where the physical evidence starts to come in, because on Celeste's remains, investigators say small blue plastic fragments were recovered. Those were later analyzed by forensic specialists, i.e. experts, and according to prosecutors, those fragments were determined to match the same blue inflatable pool that had been delivered to David's home in May of 2025. But wait, there's more. Because according to the autopsy report, 2 of Celeste's fingers, her ring finger and pinky finger, had been amputated and were never recovered. And investigators now allege that this was done in an attempt to distance her from him because one of those fingers contained a tattoo of David's name. And this next part brings us back to what we already knew. Celeste's remains were placed into bags and stored inside the front trunk of the Tesla, where investigators say she remained for weeks, possibly even months. And this next part gives us more insight into what prosecutors are alleging, because according to them, during that time, people around David started to notice a very strong smell coming from the home and the vehicle. His friends, business associates, people around him began questioning it, and according to prosecutors, they say he lied about what was going on. And then before leaving for his tour at the end of July, investigators alleged that he moved the Tesla and parked it on a street just around a corner from his home. And then fast forward to September 2025, just one day after Celeste's remains are officially identified, investigators move in because that's when they execute a search at David's home. And this is where investigators say they recovered much of the evidence. According to investigators, inside David's garage, they located blood evidence. And when that evidence was analyzed, DNA testing determined that those samples matched Celeste's unique genetic profile. And beyond that, they also said that they found additional evidence consistent with the dismemberment taking place inside that garage in that same inflatable pool that had been delivered months earlier. So, obviously that was a lot. When you take a step back and really look at all of this, it doesn't feel like just another case, man. It feels so real. And of course, at the center of everything is a 14-year-old girl who never made it home. And now we're just watching to see how all of this plays out in court. It's so sad, man. This story is just like, it just gives me a bad feeling in my stomach. Just hearing about these details about what happened to Celeste. She deserved better. You know, she was a child. So sad what happened to her. But yeah, that's everything we know so far right now. And of course, I'll keep you guys updated. So y'all have a good day. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. I'm out.